Hello there, Brad Walsh here, your host of the Empowerography Podcast, a platform that was created to help elevate and amplify the voices of women through sharing their stories. Today, my guest is Tasha Golden. Tasha is a singer, songwriter, public health scientist, a poet, the founder of Project Uncaged, and the developer of How We Human. Welcome, Tasha. I am so happy to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm all right. Thank you, Brad. Thanks for having me.
It is my honor and my pleasure. I am so excited to jump in and get started and share about all the beautiful light you put out into the world through the work you do. With that being said, let us jump right in. I want to start off because I'm so intrigued by your shift from singer-songwriter into the public health space. Your journey from singer-songwriter to public health scientist is fascinating. What was the catalyst to make such a profound shift?
Yeah, it's not the typical
No.
musician to scientist pipeline.
No.
Yeah, being a singer-songwriter is the job that I had dreamt of doing since I was very little girl. I thought that I would be doing that till I died. I got to tour for several years, songs and TV and film, got to work with really amazing musicians and producers. But two things happened in the midst of all that. The first is that I had songs about difficult experiences like my family's history of domestic violence, my own history of depression, and quickly found that all over the world, those were always the songs that people lined up after concerts wanting to talk about. And I've had hundreds and hundreds of people share with me their own experiences with abuse, with mental illness, suicide ideation. Many of those people have followed up their stories by saying that I was the first person they had ever told. And
Wow.
That was such an honor to me. But again, pretty quickly started to think about, if I'm the first person they've ever told, that means they haven't told a doctor or a therapist, like not even a spouse or partner. It means that they're living with this experience on their own. And I'm so glad that the music in a music venue, a song could create a space for that to become something that is speakable for them. But I started to think about how many decisions were maybe being made in healthcare facilities, education facilities, like homes, without the knowledge of these deeply important experiences and decisions being made based on incorrect or incomplete data, essentially, about our lives. And I started to get very curious about what it was about music that helped us to tell our stories, to show up as who we are. As a trauma expert, Bessel van der Kolk says, like, you have to be able to know what you know and feel what you feel. How does music help us do that? Why does it help us do that? But I also got curious about what happens when we leave the capacity of music and the arts out of our other essential areas of our lives, what doesn't get said, and what are the ramifications of that? So that's the first thing that happened. And the second thing that happened, much more straightforward, is that I, in part, because I didn't necessarily know how to keep myself healthy and safe while I was absorbing all of these stories from other people. And also as part of the grind of the music industry, I wound up running into catastrophic burnout and major depression that ended my music career. I was in bed for weeks. I certainly couldn't play shows. And I knew that I was going to have to reimagine who I was and what it meant to care about the things that I had cared about in a life that couldn't look the way that I so had thought that my life would look, right? And it was a crushing time. I didn't know what my future would hold or if I wanted it.
Yeah.
And so in that time, I came back to some of these questions that I developed on the road as far as what's happening for people. Why could I and so many other people share ourselves and our stories in these spaces when we weren't sharing them elsewhere? And what could that mean, not only for our individual health, but how might that change how we do health at all, how we do our communities and our interactions as a collective? And wound up pulling the thread of those questions till I had a PhD.
That is incredibly powerful because, for one, the whole burnout thing, it doesn't get talked about enough. People don't, as you mentioned, people are coming to you and telling you their stories that have never spoken to anyone. But I think that it's a common thing among women too, is not talking about the burnout and just pushing through and just keep going until you physically can't. And that we don't want people getting to that point. That's not what we want. We want to help them in the process to recognize what they're going through and what they're dealing with and help them when they're in it, not when it's gone past and, okay, now we have to help you. You're past the point. You've reached burnout. And as you said, you're in bed for days, and that's not good. That's not good for our mental well-being, our physical health. But then also on the other side of it, the power of music, how incredibly powerful that is for people. and how it unites people and brings people together in community, in space, and gives them the strength to share, gives them the courage to share, because it takes a lot to share our stories, share what we're going through, because we're told, I think, and conditioned to believe that we have to get through shit on our own. We have to figure out our shit by ourselves. And that is, nothing could be further from the truth. We can't do anything in this life alone. We need to rely on community. We need to rely on support systems around us. That is so key and so important to life in general, that we need people. You can't do this alone. Humans were not created to do things in silos, to do them alone. It's
Yeah.
not possible.
Yeah. And not created to do it in only specific, like societal, like what we approve now in like professional and public settings. Like I often talk about we have 3 robot settings that we're supposed to adhere to. In Western systems, you can be mildly upset, or you can be fine/neutral, or you can be mildly happy. But anything outside of those in either direction, really, we're pressured to suppress and get back into the robot settings. But of course, those robot settings that's not evolutionary. There's nothing biological about that or objectively real about that as far as the way that humans process our experience. And I often mention in my work now that humans evolved to make and share art for a reason. We don't often think about what that reason is. Even people who love it aren't necessarily thinking about all the time, like, why do we have this? Why did we evolve to do this?
Yeah.
But one of the reasons that we evolved to do this is that it expands our capacity for communication. It gives us a way to like bear witness to difficult things, hold and process difficult things, share difficult things, and not just difficult things, but things that are like too big for our typical conversational process like this, or like our typical language even, and that can include exhilaration and awe and love. So we ignore the power of arts of all kinds to our detriment, because they're here for a reason, and we force ourselves to just show up as the kind of staid professional. We do that to our detriment as well.
I mean, we are emotive beings. We have emotions. They are meant to be expressed, whether that be in a creative way, whatever it is, any kind of outlet. We are meant to express our emotions, and creativity is so powerful in any art form. It is healing. Art is healing, period. No matter what it is. It could be painting, music, photography, anything, cooking, whatever it is. That's your way of expressing. I say that for me as a photographer, my photography is my form of meditation. When I'm out with my camera by myself in a city wandering around, that's my form of meditation. I love it. Cooking is meditation for me. I love being in the zone and creating with food. It's an amazing process, and it's so calming. I get right in the zone, and that's what it is. That's what it's about, is relaxing yourself, calming yourself, and stepping into your zone of genius, whatever that is. It doesn't matter what it is, but being able to do that and creatively express yourself, that is healing and powerful.
Yeah. And having a space and time to do that. And or for people who might be listening and I'm not relaxed, or this isn't necessarily meditative for me, but sometimes it's like the way that you process the things that feel out of control. One of the reasons that things can feel so out of control is that we're trying to control them. We're trying to have as much of the human experience that we all like are required to have because we're here, right? And we're trying to like distill that or suppress it or force it into really specific channels. And that can create a lot of anxiety. It can make us feel like we're out of control, because we ultimately are. But there are options, there are ways to process and move through those experiences. And oftentimes art and artistic expression is a way that people do that. Not all art is beautiful. Sometimes art is very troubling. Sometimes it's part of how we've evolved to navigate those aspects of our experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how have these experiences then that you've gone through helped shape the Tasha you are today, both personally and professionally?
Oh, gosh. I think on the most obvious level, the transition from being a singer-songwriter, from thinking that I had my life mapped out and that was the story that I had about my life, the fact that I kind of lost that story has shaped my identity from then on. And not in the sense that like now I have a different identity, now I've slotted myself into a different space, but instead it's helped me to see that all of our identities are stories that we are telling. And one of the reasons that I wound up in burnout was that I really had this one story about who I could be and how I could show up in the world, how I had value. And So once I started to feel like, oh, I can't do this anymore, it's like unconsciously, I didn't even allow myself to ask, can I keep doing this? Because I would be afraid of that the answer would be no. And this was my only identity, right? And so I had to like basically lose that the ability to tell that story about myself before I could recognize that it was indeed a story. And a big part of the work that I get to do now, as far as like studying the impacts of creativity on our health and well-being, is to help people see that creativity is not just about artistic expression, but being able to be more and more creative about who we think we are and what stories we're telling about ourselves and the world. And so a way to distill that is that as creative as I was and thought I was as a singer-songwriter, the truth is that I had one story that I knew how to tell about my life. I was not at all creative about how I could show up in the world or what the collection of my interests and talents and ideas for the future, how those could come together and how they could manifest in the world. I only had one story. And again, I had to lose that story before I could realize that we all have it in us to be really creative about who we are. So that experience has shaped the work that I do now, and that understanding, that kind of undergirding understanding that who we are is always something that we are creating. It's not something that we're handed, and it's not something that we're forced to just slip out. That shapes a lot of my work across the board.
That's an incredibly hard shift because, as you said, when you identify as one thing, like we identify with the work we do, a lot of us, and that is our identity. That's who we become. And to shift out of something into something completely different is an incredibly hard shift. And it takes a lot to get used to that and to realize, wait a minute, I'm not this singer songwriter, or I'm not this. For me, it was shifting out of photography into the podcast. I'm not just a photographer, because that's how I always identified. Photography and Brad are synonymous. I am a photographer. It's part of who I am. And it's still there. It's still in me, and I still have the love for it. But sometimes our lives take us on a completely different path, and it's okay. It takes getting used to, but you also have to flow with it too and be accepting of it and have the awareness to realize that, wait a minute, no, this isn't just who I am. I can be this person too.
Yeah.
Right? It's a hard shift.
And we get a sense of power and agency from our identities, whatever those identities might be for us. And especially in our society, like a career identity can sometimes give us a sense of like power and control. You know, I certainly don't want to downplay that. But there's also, I think one of the reasons that we lean into that sense of power that we get from that is that we don't think that there's another source of it, or we think that's the only way that we can feel that level of power. And like what you're saying about photography, how I feel about being a singer-songwriter, I think that I feel more powerful recognizing that is in me, but it is not who I am. And but I couldn't have imagined I needed, I suppose, in my earlier life to maybe as a foundation to be like, this is who I am. And that maybe that gave me something to push against and to run from. But the truth is, for any of us to recognize that we have a lot of interests, we have a lot of curiosities, we have a lot of talents and skills, and that those things are part of who we are, and that if you can rely not on just like your identity, a name, a label, and rely instead on your inherent kind of like creativity and curiosity as a human being, there's a lot of power and hope in the latter.
For sure. We are multifaceted beings. We are not just that one thing. So thank you for sharing that, Tasha. So what through all that, what would you say was the most valuable takeaway or lesson for you?
I think that sense that we are not always, we are very likely as human beings to be telling ourselves stories without realizing it. And this isn't a criticism. This isn't something bad about it. It's necessary. We have to, our brains are meaning-making machines. We have to look out at the world and tell a story about it in order to like get through the day. This is just what our brains do. It's beautiful. It's a great thing. But it's a difference between knowing, like creating a mental map of the world and knowing that it's a map and that it's not the territory. It's the difference between, I suppose, knowing that you have a map and it's not the territory, and thinking that the map you have is just the world. That the map that I've created, the story that I've created about myself is just who I am. Like if you're aware that it's a story, then fine, tell the story, create the map, but understand that it can change and it will change. And part of how that shows up in my work, whether it's research or consulting or like coaching with people, is helping us see what are the stories that we're telling what are the stories that we might be telling without even realizing that we're telling them, because we just think it's just the way that it is. I'm not telling a story. I'm just reporting the weather. I'm not making something up here. And then I'm often saying that our growth is on the other side of the questions we're not asking. And so oftentimes the questions we're not asking them because we think we have all the answers already. We already think we know the territory. We know what we're looking at. We know who we are. And so there's a lot of questions that we're not asking because we think we've already got the answers. And I love James Baldwin. He's a North Star for a million reasons, but one of the things that I've latched onto from him, he said, the artist cannot and must not take anything for granted, but must drive to the heart of every answer and expose the question the answer hides. And I love that as a call not only to artists, but to scientists, to leaders of all kinds, to think about what are the answers that I'm accepting, the premises that I'm accepting, because I just think that's the way that it is. And how can I get more creative by understanding that in some way, to some extent, there's a story that's being told here, either by me or by my society, by my industry, whatever the case might be. And how do I start to peel that back so that I can ask the questions that are going to get me to the next step?
Love it. What lights you up the most about the work you do now?
Definitely seeing people recognize limitations that they have placed on themselves, and then also recognizing limitations that we've created collectively. I think a lot of times when people think about arts and health, and I think about like things like art therapy or music therapy, people might think about even how creativity and creative expression makes us feel individually. But I get very excited, especially my PhD is in public health. So I get very excited about how creativity helps us to notice the limitations that we've placed on ourselves as a society. This is just how it works. These are the structures that we have to have. These are the systems that we have to have. It has to work this way. It's always going to be this way. This is how we have to interact. And we do this mostly unconsciously. I want to be very, lots of grace here, lots of compassion for all of us. We are, we are navigating the stories that we've been handed and the stories that we've constructed in order to survive. But it's very exciting for me to see people look at, for example, a system that exists in the US, we might think about our healthcare system, to look at that system and be like, yeah, that is what it is right now. Here are all the reasons that it became this way, but it is one way to do healthcare. It is a story that's being told. And what are some other ways that we can imagine it could work for the benefit of everybody? And then, of course, you can extrapolate that kind of thing to all kinds of industries. Again, what are the premises that we're accepting? And what happens if we can just wiggle loose some of our assumptions in order to reach an aha moment, a kind of, oh, I've opened a door to get creative here because I'm no longer seeing this as a wall. I recognize that there are doors and windows to go through here.
I think if anything, the 3 years that we went through in the world, that difficult 3 years we all went through, if that didn't show us that things can be a different way, be done a different way, I don't know what else would. That is a prime example to show us and teach us that no, the standards, the societal standards don't have to be that way. Things can be done completely differently now. And I think there's a lot more people waking up to realizing that, but there's still a lot of people that need to wake the fuck up and realize that no, we don't have to do things the way they've been done for so long. Things can change. We as humans change all the time. We are constantly evolving. So therein lies everything changes. We can do things differently. We just have to figure out the different ways to do that and start implementing those to change the old guard, to change the old patterns, the old ways of thinking, and start doing things differently because we can. It's possible.
Yeah. Baldwin also said, the world is before you and you need not take it or leave it as it was when you came in. And that's one of the biggest calls for all of us as human beings to not only think about how that's true in our own lives or our families, our relationships, our communities, but also how that's literally the world. We don't need to leave it as it was when we came in.
For sure. The collective. Absolutely. And so obviously we've mentioned art is healing, storytelling, music, all forms of art. How has your creative background influenced your work in public health?
Oh, it has been essential from the most obvious angle of not many people come into public health or public health sciences from a career in the arts. And so I'm just looking at the data that I see, the problems that I'm seeing from a very different angle, and thinking about a lot of this is, even if there is a health message that you want people to get out, the way that you're communicating that, for me, from my background, I'm not thinking let's stand behind a lectern and give people a PowerPoint presentation. I'm thinking like, what are the ways that I shared music, that I saw my friends who are spoken word artists get on a stage and like dynamically engage the audience? Even something as simple as that, like how something gets communicated, there's a different way that I'm thinking through that work. And then it's also that element of realizing that everything has a story behind it and everything is creative. There's so much that when you think about the ways that we take care of ourselves, and so many of our behaviors are based on what we know, what we think that we can do. Obviously, a lot of us know that we could be doing some kind of health behavior that we're nevertheless not yet doing. Or there are people who have habits that they know are not healthy for them, but they're still doing it anyway. So it's not just knowledge, but it's what we think about our own capacity to do something or not do it. It's the resources that we have at hand. So getting creative around, again, the stories that we tell ourselves, what we do with the knowledge that we have, where we think it comes from, who we're trusting, the power that we think we have to make change, and also definitions of health. What the heck is health? So probably the biggest way that my work has influenced this, the World Health Organization defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So they really say complete well-being. That's a super high bar. And not just the absence of disease and infirmity. And when I ask people, in my talks around the world, I get to ask, what's well-being to you? And you can imagine that the answers are really diverse, but they tend to cohere around some themes of, and the audience, just as a thought experiment while you're listening, you can think, what do I think well-being is? If it's not just the absence of suffering, what is it? And the kinds of things that I hear back from people are things like having a sense of meaning and purpose, feeling connected, sense of belonging, being able to pursue my interests, feeling comfortable in my own skin, being part of something bigger than myself. And as it turns out, that kind of well-being is not something that we can get from healthcare facilities. The things that we do to get that kind of well-being tend to be rooted in arts and culture of some kind. And so even the ways that we think about what health is, where we get it, who creates it, those are always things that I've thought about a little differently than I might have been trained to think about them in just like my standard public health classes.
I love that. Love it. Food for thought for sure. What is your definition? What does well-being mean to you? I love it. What has been one of the biggest challenges in balancing your creative identity with your scientific and advocacy work?
I will admit to you that I love this question because the answer is that it has never been a challenge at all. All of these things have always felt within my body and mind, just very obviously interrelated and interdependent and like intuitively connected with one another. So I literally became a scientist because of what I had witnessed and experienced as an artist, and my experience as an artist infuse the work that I do as a scientist, and then the work that I do as a scientist makes me more creative. It makes me more aware of the power that art has and that creativity has in a general way. And then as an artist connecting with people, and also as a scientist who's connecting with people and also maybe more aware of some of the statistics and data around difficulties that people are facing, inequities, mental health challenges, you're driven to want to do something about that and to recognize that collectively, especially, we have the tools to help people live lives in which they can have true well-being. So you're driven to advocate for those things those solutions that would lead us to think of life as something that this is an experience in which we can have true well-being, not just an experience that we have to like white knuckle through and survive. And that's a decision that we can make at individual levels to an extent we inevitably have to make collectively. Do we want to create a world in which it's possible for everyone to have well-being? Because we can, but it's going to take a lot of change.
Oh, a lot of self-work. It all starts with us, the work within ourselves. But surviving is not living. You're just existing. It's about thriving and doing the work to make a difference in the world. That's what we're all here for, is at least part of our journey here is to be in and of service to one another, to help each other. And when we do that, it creates this ripple effect that flows out to all the others that we surround ourselves with, and that flows out to theirs. And that's what it's about.
Yeah. I give trainings in mental health and trauma informed practice. And as part of that, we talk about public health, what we call social determinants of health, the things, those structures and systems in place that ultimately limit our choices and shape our choices and shape our health. And what I'm often communicating is that the science tells us that we ourselves heal when we hope to change the world. It's a big part of what we call post-traumatic growth, that we have a traumatic experience, and a lot of people, a lot of humans, in order to heal, are compelled to try to help other people, make sure that nobody else has that experience, or to help walk other people through that experience. And yeah, we have lots of science indicating that part of how we as individuals heal is to be part of the work to make the world better. And I love to get in at that from on a couple levels. How can we help the people around us within the world as it is right now? But then also, how can we change the world by reimagining what the world even is and refusing to accept that it has to function the way that it's functioned?
There's a common theme here, I'm seeing.
Yes, always.
So looking back, Tasha, what is one lesson you learned as an artist that has deeply impacted the way that you approach public health and trauma work?
Probably the answer that comes to mind right now is the idea that there is always more going on with the people around us than we expect, more going on with people than we can find out through some kind of like sound bite or a statistic. And recognizing from art, including the art that I get to make with incarcerated youth, that people, Sean Ginwright once said that young people are agents in the creation of their own well-being. People are able to be participants in the paths that lead them to healing and to the lives that they want to lead. They are part of that work, but we have to be willing to open up, to create platforms for that and open up doors for that. So people are more than the label that they're given, more than a statistic, more than a sound bite, but also we have to put ourselves in a position of being listeners, of being learners, to hear people on their terms, and then be able to use that to create even better solutions and better pathways for all of us.
That speaks to the whole issue of people learning to listen, because I have to say, a lot of the people out there think they're good listeners, think they know how, they don't have a clue how to listen. They're listening to respond, and that's not how it works. You should listen to hear, actually listen and hear what the other person is saying. You could walk away from a conversation with someone from with a completely different perspective than you even knew possible by listening to someone else. And this is a big problem, is we don't listen. We listen to respond, and that's it. And that's got to change, because I believe that conversation is the catalyst for change. If we start to talk about stuff, if we start to share our ideas, our thoughts with people who actually are listening to us, that's how change begins.
Yeah. And there's a kind of requirement for a certain level of imagination and safety to be a listener like that. The reason that people listen to respond is it's rooted in their own trauma or fear or mental health concerns. They feel that they have to respond. That's what maybe gives them worth or value, or they're scared of not responding. They're scared of what happens if they don't say what they need to say. So there's a lot of ultimately a kind of turmoil that sort of leads people to take that position of not being able to quite listen. And I think part of that is also a lack of imagination and creativity that people who are in a position, and we've all been there, like when we're not really listening, we can't really listen. I think a lot of that comes down to our inability to imagine that if we do just listen, that we will be okay on the other side. That if we don't just jump in and respond, there will be another thing that we can do that will be safe for us, that will be okay for us, that will lead to something better. And sometimes that's based on objectively observable. That could be a factual situation. For some people, they are not safe in that situation. They need to take care of themselves. But I think a lot of times we get really held back by our fear that if we don't respond in the ways that we have trained ourselves to respond, we're going to be stuck forever.
Yeah, for sure. Now, this is a great segue into the next question. You are the founder of Project Uncaged, which is a trauma-informed creative writing program for incarcerated girls. Can you share with us about Project Uncaged, how you came up with the name for it, the inspiration behind starting the project, all the things?
Yeah, years ago, I was as a band performing at this performing arts center in a small town in Ohio. And they called us up before that show and they said, if your schedule allows, would you be willing to come earlier in the day during the lunch hour and perform at the juvenile detention facility that's right down the street from the Performing Arts Center? And we were like, yeah, let's do that. And my partner and I at the time, as a duo, we showed up, we shared some stories around why we wrote songs, where they came from, what our upbringings had been like, and just felt like we had this rich conversation with the young people there. And afterwards, somebody on staff there approached me and invited, she was kind of saying, it seems like you feel comfortable talking about kind of difficult things in a very open way from the stage, and the young people really appreciate that. Would you consider coming and being a writer in residence for a girls program here? And I wasn't super familiar with didn't have personal experience in the justice system, but I just thought this sounds like a really beautiful opportunity. Like the nerd that I am, I spent months researching the juvenile justice system, girls' experiences, found out about things that they call like the sexual assault to prison pipeline, a lot of trauma history among girls, and started to really think about how can I create an experience for them that's mindful of these things, that's informed by their situation, that's as relevant to them as possible, and that's as interesting and enlivening for them as possible. So I did that work with that facility and left that just thinking like, that's the coolest way I've ever spent my time. That's the coolest thing I've ever done. And how can I do it again? Uncaged as a title came from work with some of those first young people that I had written with, a sense of feeling like they were caged and wanting to get out. And then some of their feedback as far as like being able to write, being able to perform on stage, even while they were locked up, made them feel like they weren't confined by those walls. And so that's where the name came from. And I have to tell you that the young women that I've worked with in Project Uncaged have been among my greatest teachers about what justice is, about how to be trauma informed, about the imperative that we change our systems and our structures to make it possible for everyone to thrive and be well and to have the opportunities that they seek. Just those girls are experts in their lives and in their situations, and they have so much to teach. And I'm so glad to have been a beneficiary of their wisdom and of their art.
That is incredibly beautiful and so selfless. That work is so important to help our younger generation. And what you're doing, I think, is absolutely amazing. So kudos to you for creating that space for these girls. It's so important. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Why, in your opinion, is it so crucial for creatives, whether they're writers, musicians, performers, to understand mental health and trauma-informed practice?
I will say, I think that it's important for all of us to understand mental health and trauma-informed practice. And after all, whether we think it or not, so all of you listening, whether you think so or not, you also are creative. You are a creative. You are creating so much in the world, whether that's your business, your children, like literally, whatever it is that you are creating. But yeah, it's important for all of us to understand mental health and trauma-informed practice, because it gives us a sense of the context in which we live, a different sense of ourselves, that when you can understand what trauma is and if that has personally affected you, then you, again, have a different story to tell about yourself, or a different way to tell your story, or you're like looking at yourself in a different mirror, and you can see something that you maybe didn't see and understand yourself in a new way. And then if you don't have your own personal history of trauma, which studies indicate that 70% or more of us do, then understanding that as an aspect of the human experience shifts the way that you understand the people around you and the things that you see happening in the world, shifts how you understand other people's behaviors or how you interpret them. And from a more general perspective, we often talk about a concept of universal design, which is this concept that the things that are designed for people with disabilities wind up benefiting all of us. Like we often talk about the curb cut that's designed for people who use wheelchairs, but it also winds up being useful if you're rolling your suitcase on a trip or have a stroller. And similarly with trauma-informed practice, like the things that we do because we're learning about trauma as this kind of a specific kind of experience or diagnosis or things like that, are things that wind up benefiting all of us. So whether you have that experience or not. But to answer your question about why this is important for creatives in particular, the artists throughout millennia have been truth tellers, have been known as being the people who are like excavating the human experience and coming back up with things that represent the truth for all of us. And this is across artistic genres. Comedians are great at this. Obviously, songwriters, composers, poets. And in light of that, being able to both know how to take care of our own mental health, to be able to create the boundaries that we might need, to be able to give ourselves the rest and space we might need for that that critical and exploratory work that we're always doing, that's very important. And then also, of course, if you're interacting with audiences, with whether that's your readers or your performer, and you have a live audience, whatever the case might be, to be able to know how to share your work and talk about your work in a way that doesn't necessarily have to hold anything back, but being aware of how that might affect other people. And maybe there might be situations where you want to do that mindfully in order to keep people safe. Even if your goal is to provoke and trouble people, there's also a way to do that in a way that's going to make them more able to act in response to what they've seen rather than shutting down. So there's some really wonderful things that you can learn that can help make your work more effective and more sustainable.
Love it. What have you witnessed firsthand in your trauma-informed writing program that proves the power of storytelling in rehabilitation?
There are so many stories that I could tell. I think immediately about a young woman at a rehabilitation facility who wrote a poem about why she was in the situation that she was in. But in that poem, she disclosed that she was gay. And she had been locked up with a kind of similar group of girls for several months. And they knew each other pretty well, but this was not something that her peers knew about her. And one afternoon when we were all together, we often make space for young people to share their work if they want to. And I would like to share this. And she stood up and read her poem for everyone. And it became this, like, once her listeners realized like what she had conveyed in it, it was just this really beautiful moment of them being like, I see you just said XYZ. And thank you for sharing that. That's so cool. That became this whole conversation around like a very difficult thing that she had shared in her poem about why she was there, but this sense of her, part of her identity that she hadn't been able to share before, that had become safe enough to share with this group of girls. And the conversation that ignited in that sense of group cohesion that was sort of like cultivated in that sense of sharing. It's a really stark reminder in my memory of the power. I don't think that she would have chosen to just stand up in front of everybody and be like, here's why I'm here, and here's who I am, and here's who I love. But the kind of craft of poetry gave her a way to share this in a way that felt very powerful as an art, felt very creative, and she could own that and stand up and as a performer share that, and then have a chance to get the response and the feedback that she wouldn't have had if she were maybe limited to a kind of traditional talk therapy.
Stand up in front of people and tell them this, like you said, I am here because of this, I am this, I am this. Very different when you do it creatively. It just adds that beautiful element to it.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
And once it's been done, it's not like she can only ever tell those stories in the space of a poem. Like once she did that in the space of a poem, then there was something that was freed up in her. Like then she could talk about it differently in a kind of conversational way, but that became a vehicle for her to be able to be heard and feel heard on her terms.
Which is really, excuse me, when you break it down, that's all we all want is to be seen and heard. That's a pretty simple, basic thing. We just want to be seen and heard. That's it. It's powerful for sure. How does your work challenge traditional narratives about incarcerated youth, particularly young women?
It depends on what those narratives are. But I think most fundamentally, the work challenges the idea that young people are not and cannot be part of their own healing and the solutions that would transform their communities and the systems as they are right now. A lot of programs that might be similar to mine tend to focus on the kind of like stress reduction and group connectivity that can happen in the space of the arts while you're within the four walls of a facility that you're working in. But Project Uncaged, it was important to me early on, in part because of my career history, my familiarity with publishing and distributing art. I saw what these young people were writing, and it was really beautiful. And so they had the opportunity to decide, do you want one of your poems or more than one of your poems to go into a book? We will publish that book, and we distribute those books to the mayor's office, to city council, to local and state representatives of lots of different kinds. And we share them along with policy briefs and advisory briefs, like saying, here's what girls are revealing in their poems. Here's what that might mean as far as from a public health standpoint now, this work that I do. Here's what you can do in your position to help make a difference in that. And it's recognizing young people, again, like that part of their healing is their ability to change the world. And they feel so powerful in that kind of, when given that sort of platform. I've worked with some groups of girls where they're really not interested in writing at all. But when I talk about the book, and that I've had a girl say to me, like, oh, the mayor's going to read this? Give me a pen. Like, literally, like, she didn't want to write, but then she knew who was going to be reading it. She had so much to say. And that is so true of so many of our young people and of many vulnerable populations, that they have so much to say. And if we design solutions and opportunities without their direct input and expertise, we are going to be falling on our faces the whole time. But if we lean in and listen to them and let them be the leaders, we're gonna actually get somewhere.
There's that listening piece again. What is one lesson you've learned about healing that you didn't expect when you started this work?
I'm not sure if it's a lesson in that it's not necessarily something that I didn't know beforehand, but I am daily confronted with the importance of working collectively to enable and create the healing that we all need, recognizing, especially in terms of my own burnout, that there's a drivenness that I bet a lot of listeners of this podcast can relate to, a sense of being driven. We talked about like the drivenness to keep going no matter what happens, and that can drive even to burnout. And we don't necessarily know what's behind that drivenness, but sometimes what's behind our drivenness to keep going no matter what is trauma, is fear, is scarcity, is a sense of a lack of our worth. A capitalist society tells us we're only as valuable as what we're contributing monetarily. And we have this drive to continue. And in order to, there are things that we can do individually to push back on that, including letting ourselves rest, including honoring rest as a fundamental part of being creative and of being a contributor to the world around us. And Trisha Hersey, the Nat Ministry, is a great researcher and artist in this space. But in order to honor our need for rest and for connectivity and for creative expression, we also have to think collectively around how are we going to make sure that people have the time and the space and the resources for that. It's hard to tell somebody who has 3 kids and 3 jobs that they need to take rest or that they might benefit from spending time in nature. Okay, that's true, but we're going to need to change something from a higher level in order to make that truly possible. And the thing is that it is so possible. We have more than enough resources. It's a matter of imagination and will, really. And it's been encouraging to me to see how many people are excited about that realm of imagination, to think about what can we do together.
It's also having the awareness and knowing that there are options available. That's a big piece of it too, is knowing that, hey, you know what, I can take a rest. There are ways, there are resources out there that will help me. So that's a big piece of it too. And through conversations like this that you and I are having right now, this is how we've helped to bring awareness around that and let people know that there are ways to help you, for sure.
Yeah. And honoring, like similar to what you said earlier, that it starts with each of us, that, you know, if the story I'm telling myself is that you have to grind away and that's where you get your value, if that's the story that I'm telling myself, then it's going to be difficult for me to work toward a world in which everybody else can take rest as they need it, right? But we shift our own mentality and we start to notice different ways that we can approach our work and approach our own drivenness and our own goals and our own visions. And then we get lit up by how we can help make a world and a system where that's true for more people.
For sure. So speaking of rest and self-care and all of those things, how do you take care of yourself emotionally while holding space for others who have experienced deep trauma?
I am a work in progress when it comes to this.
As we all are.
I have in common with many people, including, I'm sure, a lot of listeners here, a history of depression. And it's not something that like, oh, I had depression 10 years ago and I changed my life and now I never have it. So I always want to be very transparent about it's a journey in itself and it's a work in progress. I have learned that being in nature is incredibly important for me. The poet Mary Oliver once said, "The trees save me and daily." And that feels true for me on my walks. So giving myself, like honoring that fact about myself and trying to make time to be in nature has been so important. And then also making sure that I'm reading and putting myself in touch with other people who do similar work so that I can know that what I'm experiencing is not anomalous. That's a big part of it, a big shift between a difference between myself now and the work that I do and myself before that catastrophic burnout is that I have language for my experience. I know what to call it. I can recognize it. And I know that it's not just me. I know that this is something that's really common. And the difference, it doesn't mean that I don't experience the hardship. It doesn't mean that everything's fine and I'm just like living a Zen life all the time. But it's a massive difference to know what it is that I'm experiencing, to be able to trace that to oh, this is clear in the science. This is why this happens. These are some potential solutions. And to know that many people who do similar work that I do, whether it's artistic work or research or holding space for other people, many people have very similar experiences. And there's some solidarity in that. And
For sure. Absolutely.
you start to find new ways. When you know that you're not anomalous and alone, you start to be able to search for solutions because you know that they're out there. You know that there's somebody else who's articulated this experience, who's been through this. And maybe something that they've done can also be a solution for you.
And that is so powerful. It's the same with storytelling. When we share our stories, it gives others permission to stand up and know it's okay to share theirs too. So it's all tied in. It's very important. And again, it always comes back to community and support and surrounding ourselves with those people who are of like mind and have been through similar things, and just being able to share so that other people know, first of all, that they're not alone. Secondarily, maybe you have some wisdom that you've learned through your journey that will help prevent that next person from going through the same shit, and they can do things a little bit differently. So that they don't go through that full experience, that they've learned from your experience and they can take that forward in their own journey.
That's such an important thing for all of us to remember, that the things that we might think are obvious, like if there's something that you do to cope or to help soothe or to connect with somebody else, if those things seem obvious to you, there might be somebody else who's never done that, or who just, it wouldn't occur to them. And being able to be honest about what we're going through and how we cope with it, how we get through it, both of those things together can be such a buoy for the people around us.
For sure. If you could change one thing about the way society approaches trauma and healing, what would it be?
Just one?
One of the big ones, yeah.
Yeah, I would change the emphasis on the individual. And I say that with a big caveat. That's often where things have to start, and that's where we have our control. And so there's no way in which, especially somebody with my kind of history, there's no way in which I'm downplaying what we can do as individuals. But so often when we talk about mental health, we are talking about, oh, how can we get more therapists to address like these individual problems, or think about like medical therapies or digital apps, like these kinds of things that can help individuals. And let me be clear, I love those things. I've used those things. I've been on research teams to investigate those things. Like those are all wonderful. But like I mentioned earlier, to a lot of times, the reason that we wind up having difficulties with our mental health or with trauma is a lack of resources around us, a lack of a community in which we can feel safe to belong, in which we can have the lives and opportunities that we need and deserve in order to thrive, thinking more collectively and more systemically. I asked people earlier, what does well-being mean to you? And a definition that I've been using for myself in my own work has been that well-being is having a life that you want to participate in and feel like you can. Those two things together, having a life you want to participate in and feel like you can. And sometimes maybe over the next couple of days, as you're thinking about like through your life, like you can think about, as you hear people talk about mental health, are they addressing the symptoms of having a life that is just really hard to be in? Or are there solutions to mental health about creating that, like a world in which more people can have that life that they really feel like they can and want to participate in? It's a different way to go about it. And it's
for sure
getting at root causes instead of symptoms.
Band-aids over bullet holes, which is really what we do primarily, is we don't get to the root cause. And especially when we're talking about Western medicine and the way that whole system works, it's bullets over our band-aids over bullet holes, instead of getting to the root cause to really dig in and find out, where is this coming from? Why is this person behaving this way? Why are they dealing with what? Where did it start? So it's getting to the root cause of it for sure. Now, speaking of mental health, can you share a little bit with us about the mental health training program you developed, How We Human?
Yeah, I originally developed a training in trauma-informed practice for the people who were volunteering in my program, Project Uncaged. Because of the sensitive population that we were working with, a lot of sensitive topics that could come up, it was very important to me and to the teams and funders that I was working with early on that anybody engaged in that work would have either a background in mental health as a mental health professional or would be able to get a training. So many years ago, I was offering that training to my volunteers. And then 2020 hit and I started to get all kinds of emails from people around the country saying like, Tasha, you can think about like arts organizations or arts educators or things like that. Like Tasha, our artists are facing so much trauma in their communities, or the people that they work with don't know what's going on, don't know how to like deal with this change due to the pandemic and things like that. And they are really struggling. We heard you had a training that was related to this. Could you give that to our artists? And yeah, in 2020, I started to give a kind of modified version of my original training to more and more arts organizations and creatives and creative leaders around the country. And then saw how that was not only helping them to deal with crises in the moment, but also, number one, boosting their own mental health as people who could like now had tools for themselves as leaders and facilitators and educators, but then also making them more creative when people started to see what mental health kind of was, new ways to talk about it. What is trauma? What are some ways that we can deal with it? How does creativity in the arts play a role in helping us all cope with mental health and deal with it? They started to get so many more ideas for what they could do in their communities and in their work, in their schools, in their healthcare facilities. And the current iteration of How We Human, it's now a professional development training in mental health and trauma-informed practice with those as goals. Like what's like a kind of 101 baseline that we can get to you as far as what is trauma-informed practice, what is trauma and mental health, and also making sure that you have some tools and some understanding around what it could look like in your own particular scenario to offer trauma-informed practice, to be trauma-informed in your work, to get creative, to maybe borrow some of the tools that we have from arts and creativity to enhance the work that you do and to make more healing spaces for yourself and others.
Oh, wow, that is such powerful, necessary, and beautiful work that you do. I think it's absolutely incredible that you're sharing that gift with the world and giving that gift, because mental health affects everybody. I don't care who you are, whether you suffer directly from it or someone, you are touched by it. Every single person on this planet has been touched by mental health in one way or another. So to be able to have this training, this program that helps people to deal with it is so incredible. I applaud the work that you're doing. I think it's absolutely amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. And being able to like give people a sense of the necessity that we all have, no matter what our mental health histories are, to make space on the human experience. To again, like you said early on, to not try to squeeze ourselves into something that the human experience is vast. It's the only kind of experience we get is the vast kind.
Yeah.
And when we learn that's true and how we can make space for that, all of us get more healing and more well-being.
We all benefit for sure. What would you say is the most powerful truth that you've uncovered through your work with trauma, creativity, and mental health?
The most powerful truth, I think it's that when we are given time and rest and creative space, we all have ideas about what we need to heal and how we can heal. Sometimes the reason that we feel so in the dark about what do I need in order to feel better, to be better, sometimes we're self-censoring the answer to that because unconsciously we don't think that the answer is possible. So we cut it out. But given enough space and enough creative opportunity and a sense of safety around, let me just brainstorm, let me just get in touch with who I am and think about what I need. This sounds I am not a woo person. This is sounding a little far more than I intend, but this is grounded in some science and things like that. We have to have some space and safety to think about who we really are, what is really going on, what's motivating this behavior or this issue, where did this wound come from that I'm trying to address, or otherwise. And when we give ourselves enough space, we often are able to tap into our own ideas of what we might need to heal. And we often hand over that power to other people who are clinicians, who know a lot, who are experts. And hey, as an expert, I love experts. But we often, some of us can downplay the intuition that we have or the recognition that we have of what we're actually searching for and what we need.
I think that intuition, I mean, we all have intuition, but I think that it's been tamped down within us because of societal pressures, because of societal conditioning, all the conditioning that we've been subject to in this life. It gets tamped down and we forget that it's there. We lose sight of it. And so it's a matter of I think tapping back into it and realizing that you do have that ability within you and to trust in it, which is a huge piece. And it takes a lot of work to lean into it and trust in it and believe that what you're feeling is real.
Yeah.
And that you better than anybody else. No one else knows you better than you. But it's about finding that again and leaning back into it and believing in it.
Yeah. And sometimes I just want to say, to be clear, that there are things that we recognize that we need that are not available to us, like just objectively. But I've seen a lot of people, again, that post-traumatic growth that can happen when people recognize this isn't available to me and it should be. And that gives me now a sense of direction as far as what I want to do for myself and other people, to whether that's advocating for a policy change, a resource change, some kind of collective work, mutual aid. But being able to tell ourselves the truth about what we need is a wonderful first step.
For sure. If you could deliver one final message to the world about the power of storytelling and healing, what would it be?
The story can always change. Whatever the story is right now is just the story that's being told right now. And the story's not done being written until you're done, right?
Very true.
And there are a lot of societal pressures, a lot of familial pressures, a lot of self-imposed pressures that we get into a story and we think we have to stay there and live there and make our homes there. But the story is always changeable, not necessarily without, it's not like a change is going to happen without chaos sometimes.
Yeah.
And without a lot of
sure.
disruption, as it did in my own life. But it's not final.
What do you think your unique skill set or superpower is that's helped you become successful?
I think I ask questions of everything. But I have since I was a little girl, always the person way beyond the toddler phase of asking why. But I needed to understand the why behind literally everything. I am neurodivergent, and definitely pattern recognition is a big thing. But the drive to understand the why behind why we do things. Why is this a social norm? Why is this the way this institution works? And a kind of complete inability to just accept it at face value. I've never been able to do that. And so if something is the way it is just because it's been that way, I have no ability to give credence to that whatsoever. And yeah, that has become a boost to me, because there's nothing that I'm not willing to question. There's nothing that I'm not willing to critique or criticize, including myself and my views, my beliefs, and certainly including institutions and systems and norms, the way it is, Yeah. Being willing to say, but why is
asking
crucial.
Questions is how we learn.
Yeah.
That's the only way we're going to learn, is to ask questions. Speaking of success, how do you define that word? What does success mean to you?
Oh, I was just in a conversation about this yesterday. I feel like it's changing all the time. And I think what I was establishing yesterday for myself is that I think I would distrust if I landed on a definition and was like, this is my definition from now on. But because who we are is changing all the time and the world is changing all the time, I can guess that the definition of success will be changing constantly with that. I think right now my definition is swirling around something like being able to contribute to the world something that I think is of value, while also understanding it and acknowledging and honoring my own humanity. I am a creature. I'm not a robot. And how do
the 3 robotic phases.
Yes. Contributing in a way that aligns with my values and that also aligns with my humanity.
I love it. What would you say is one of the most important things you've learned in your life? And what was your life like before you learned that? And what was your life like after you learned it?
Oh, I don't know if it's one of the most important things. I'm bad at giving things, here's number one. But I think it's been an important lesson to recognize how much we need, I'm sorry to say the word again, how much we need stories, how much we're driven by stories. But something that comes up in my work a lot, because I'm a scientist and because I'm often doing research and evaluation for different things, I have often told audiences that, like, we really, as a species, and especially in the Western world, and especially if you're leaders, we really want to tell ourselves that we make our decisions based on evidence. We want the evidence. We want to know. And for me, I definitely do deep dives into every tiny little thing. I want to know all about it before I purchase it or before I do it or whatever. So yeah, I want the knowledge and I want the evidence. But ultimately, what most of us make our decisions based on is a story of some kind. And that can be this kind of story that I was mentioning earlier about who I am, but it can also be the
Mm-hmm.
story of what we think we're talking about. I'm going to make this evidence-based decision about a policy, but ultimately what I'm actually doing is interpreting that evidence in the context of the story that I have about that policy, the kind of emotions that I feel when people talk about that policy, all of that. That's been an interesting lesson to run into so much as an artist, and then certainly as a scientist, to understand if that's true, then what is the evidence that I'm generating here in my scientific study, and how am I presenting it, and what is the goal? These are always worthy questions to ask.
Beautiful. What is something surprising that you've learned about yourself in the last year?
That I am still really bad at saying no and stopping when I know that I need to. I'm not proud that this was a surprising lesson the last year, but I think it's also valuable to be honest about our situations and our stories. But yeah, like you can get to a point where, yeah, I know how to do this. I know what I'm doing. I talk about this all the time. I promote this. I train people in this. I'm fine. And then at some point get to a point of exhaustion and you're like, oh no, I've been doing that grinding thing that I tell people all the time that they can't keep doing and be able to sustain their work. So yeah,
No is a full sentence,
absolutely.
period. But it's funny because we as humans can't just stop at the word no. We feel we have to explain why we're saying no. And you don't have to do that to anybody. You just say no and that's it. You don't have to explain why you're saying no. But we so often do that.
Yeah.
Because we've been conditioned that you have to tell the person why you're saying no. They need to know.
Yeah.
And no, they don't. It's just no. And that's it.
And especially for
It's
women,
an important conversation.
The
Yes.
reason has to be something other than because I don't want to.
Yeah.
That your
sure.
own preference
Absolutely.
doesn't matter. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What does the word empowerment mean to you?
From working with young people, I've had an interesting relationship with this word because a lot of times young people like to use this word like, oh, this is an empowering program or we are empowered. And then sometimes I've had young people push back pretty strongly on it as far as if you are empowering, if this program is empowering us, then what you're saying is that you have power and you're giving it to us. We already had the power. And like listening to them and thinking about the word, I think what it means to me is there's two different ways that we can think about it. There can be like a literal and objective empowering where somebody who literally does have power that somebody else doesn't have makes some kind of change to that, so they give that power up to the other person. We can see that in employee-employer relationships. We can see it in parent-child relationships, teacher-student relationships, etc. And then also thinking about it as recognizing the power that is in us and how we pull that out, in which case something that's empowering might be something that's showing us how to draw out our own power. It's not necessarily objectively giving it to us, but it's showing us that's already there.
Beautiful. Okay, we're going to jump into a little rapid fire section. So the next grouping of questions just be 1, 2, 3, 4-word answer type thing. Okay. What is one of your favorite quotes?
Oh, I already told it to you, Baldwin. The world is before you, and you need not take it or leave it as it was when you came in.
Okay. What is one thing you want but cannot buy with money?
A sense of confidence that I'm doing what I'm here to do.
If you could teach the world one thing, what would it be?
To imagine that things can be otherwise.
How would you describe yourself in one word?
Creative.
What is one thing you love about yourself that is not related to your physical appearance?
All my questions.
What is your favorite self-care practice?
Walking in nature, for sure. Or being with animals.
Animals, yes. That concludes our rapid fire section. Now back to our regularly scheduled program. I created a bonus question that I did not send to you ahead of time. If other people could use 3 words to describe you, what would you want those 3 words to be?
I think truth teller is one. Curious. And creative, I think I would want to be on that list. Yeah.
Okay. If you could step into my shoes, what question would you have asked yourself that I didn't ask you?
Oh, you have asked so many delightful questions that I don't think there's any left on my list.
Receive that. If you had the opportunity to sit down and have a 1-hour conversation with one woman, any woman in the world, alive or dead, who would it be and why?
Oh gosh, I have such a great list. Audre Lorde, I want to talk to her about self-care and poetry and health. I would love to talk to Bell Hooks as well about education and love and activism. I would love to talk to my grandmother, who I never knew, and my mom did not know her either. Yeah, let's go with those 3 for now.
Okay. If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be?
You are doing far better than you think you are. You're not alone in what you're experiencing. It doesn't mean that you're effing it up. And there's a story that comes out of all of this.
Beautiful. Lastly, if you were to deliver your last 30-second speech to the world, your corner of the world, your tribe, your people, what would that last 30 seconds sound like? What words of wisdom would you impart?
I would say that all creativity begins with refusal. Refusal to accept the world as it is. Any artist has to believe that the world needs to be changed before they're willing to create a piece of art. If you just think the world as it is fine, you don't create anything. So embracing a sense that like things, this is not as it should be. That doesn't have to be an ending or just a criticism, that that's where the creative process begins.
That is fucking powerful. I love it, Tasha. Thank you so much for taking and making the time to be here with me today, for sharing your story, your journey, and the beautiful light you put out into the world through all the work you do. It's been an absolute pleasure sitting down and speaking with you. I am grateful and honored to have you as a member of the Empowerography community, to call you a friend, and to have had this chance to sit with you and share in your story. You're a beautiful, bright light in this world. Thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Please, if you don't mind sharing with the audience where they can connect with you, if they want to work with you, if they want to learn more about who you are and what you do.
Yes, I have created a custom website for listeners of this podcast. So you can go there and get a free resource about redefining rest. We talked about that earlier. That might be interesting for you all, and some other things. So it is just tashagolden.com/empowerography.
Ah, beautiful. Thank you so much, Tasha. It has been an absolute pleasure. Once again, my name is Brad Welsh, host of your Empowerography podcast. Today, my guest has been Tasha Golden. She is a singer, songwriter, public health scientist, a poet, the founder of Project Uncaged, and the developer of How We Human. Thank you so much. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you so much. You too.